So Fountain Pen 101, there are a couple disclaimers that I want to point out. I am specifically going to be talking about like more of the affordable pen range, and I'm also specifically going to be talking about more beginner knowledge, I think. Okay, now that we've kind of talked about some of the basic introduction, I want to talk about the anatomy of a fountain pen. And I think this is really important to know so that you can buy the perfect pen for your needs. So, okay, there's three main parts to a fountain pen. There's the nib, the feed, and the collector, and the reservoir. So I have them all labeled on this map here. So that metallic thing, that is the nib. It has like a metallic slit in the middle where the ink travels down and it comes out onto the paper, again through capillary force. The feed and the collector is, if you can kind of see a cylinder right in the center going from the reservoir to the nib, that is the feed. And that feed is also the thing that is most likely to get clogged in a fountain pen. So that thing needs the most maintenance, but it's not too hard. If you can see these like little like lines here, so those, the things that look like gills, those are the collectors. Those things help ink flow a little bit more smoothly. Okay, so the last thing is the reservoir. The reservoir is pretty self-explanatory. It's wherever the ink goes. There's a couple different shapes and sizes and things, but this little tube here, this is where the ink goes. So this will be the reservoir. Okay, so let's talk about the nibs in detailing. So there's three big parameters that I think people should always consider. That's the shape of a fountain pen nib, the size, and the flexibility. Let's talk about the shape first. Most fountain pens are round shaped like this, which means that the tip of the pen is round. If you guys can see that little bulb on the tip, so this is a round fountain pen. And so if I write with this, it will basically look exactly the same thickness in whichever direction I write it in. So if I go tick, 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 tick in this direction versus tick, 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 tick in that direction, it's all the same size because the nib is round. That's not true if you have an italic nib, or stub nib is usually what it's called. So a stub nib is a flat nib. Do you guys see how like flat that tip is? It's kind of wide and rectangular. If I try to write with this, if I motion it in one direction, it's really thin. And if I write it in the perpendicular direction, the line that comes out is really thick. So this is going to give you like a little bit of that calligraphy kind of feel to it, which is really fun to write with. But frankly, if you're like using this to take notes, this is kind of annoying because who wants to take notes with a 1.5 millimeter wide pen, I guess. The second parameter that you should look at is size. So usually there are 4 sizes that a company will have for a fountain pen: extra fine, fine, medium, and bold. And I think that's pretty explanatory. Extra fine is really thin, bold is really thick. If you are looking at italic nibs, I think the smallest I've ever seen is a 1.0 width nib, and then I think the highest I've ever seen is a 1.8. This one specifically is a 1.5. One more thing I do want to mention about the size of a fountain pen is that Japanese pens and Japanese nibs tend to have smaller sizes than a Western nib. So if you get a fine size in a Japanese pen, it is probably close to an extra fine for a Western pen. Okay, so the last one that I want to talk about is flexibility. This is basically the amount of like motion that the twines, which are the little metal parts on your nib, how much they move when you press your pen into the paper. So a hard nib, the little twines aren't going to move very much. If it's soft, it has a little bit more give, and if it's flex, it'll really move. What that means is that a hard nib will be very uniform in the thickness. A soft nib is going to have a little bit more give, so it's going to have a little bit more of a calligraphy feel to it. If I have a soft nib, I could have a little bit more line variation depending on how I press onto the paper like this. So you won't get that with a hard nib. Now, a flex nib will give you a huge amount of variation. So this actually doesn't write anymore because I broke it. But if I press down on this pen, do you guys see how that twine separates really hard? So that separation is going to give huge lines. You can't just fit any pen with a flex nib, because if you have a flex nib, the amount of ink that you are writing with changes as you press into the paper quite dramatically, and most feeds will not be able to keep up with that. So usually you'll have, if you want a flex nib, you'll have to buy like an entire pen that is designed to be a flex pen. Now let's talk a little bit about the reservoir. So as I mentioned before, reservoir is where the ink goes. There's a couple different variations, I guess. Here I have converters and cartridges. Cartridges, I think, is really the best way to go if you're just starting out, and it's basically a little tube that has your ink. The companies will sell it in those little tubes. Here I have some like unopened cartridges. You guys see that there's ink in there. It has some kind of covering, but basically what you'll need to do, there's like a little pole on the inside that kind of sticks out. You just kind of push it in and then you pop it into it. You'll see the seal break here. They're super easy to use. You don't have to worry about getting ink on your hands or anything. The biggest problem with this is that cartridges don't come in all colors. So a lot of ink companies, they'll only make cartridges for inks that are in their standard collection. And there's actually a lot of ink companies that just straight up don't make cartridges. The next one is converters, and I think converters are really the most popular and most common. This one's kind of empty, so you can kind of see it pretty well. But this one is a piston screw converter. I can pop it out like this. So it kind of goes inside the pen just like the cartridge does. But you can fill it with any kind of ink that you want. I will mention that if you are buying a pen and then you get a converter, just to make sure that they do fit together, there is an international size, but Japanese pens especially don't always follow that. They usually have their own proprietary sizes. So there's two other reservoir types that I kind of want to talk about. The first one is a built-in. So that means instead of having like a separate entity inside of your pen that is your reservoir, the entire barrel of your pen is a reservoir. And this picture I have here is a TWSBI Eco, and so you guys can kind of see there's like a clear empty tube in the middle. Some of the biggest advantages of that is that it gives you a huge capacity. So cartridges and converters, you're looking at maybe 1 milliliter, 2 milliliters worth of ink. Because you're using the entire barrel of the pen as a reservoir in case of a built-in pen, you're looking at closer to 3 milliliters. The last type of reservoir I want to talk about is an eyedropper. So when the fountain pen first was like invented, it was meant to be an eyedropper. So what that means is that it's kind of like a built-in fountain pen, except you don't have any kind of screw or like vacuum mechanism. It's literally like you have a pen and you have a barrel and you just dump ink in here like manually with an eyedropper or a syringe. It gives you that huge capacity without it being expensive as a regular built-in pen. But not all pens will become an eyedropper. There are definitely some pens that are made to be an eyedropper. Other ones, you might have to put some silicone grease just to make sure the ink doesn't leak out. So there's a lot of different options. So just kind of go with what you're comfortable with. I think a lot of people usually start out with a cartridge. So, okay, now that we've talked about the actual parts of a fountain pen, I'm going to start talking about some of the, I guess, recommendations that I have. From the US, I think Parker is probably one of the more established fountain pen companies. They do have mostly really expensive pens, but they do have, I think, like two options that are less than $100, so I do have them listed there. Conklin makes a lot of cheaper fountain pens. Noodlers is actually an ink company, but Noodlers, Ahab, and Conrad are very famous for being really cheap flex pens, because usually flex pens can be very expensive. Europe is really the homeland of fountain pens. So here I got Lamy, Kaweco, and Diplomat. All three are actually from Germany. All three really reliable pens. Asia is a little bit more of a newcomer in the fountain pen scene. TWSBI is a very good company. I've already talked about it a little bit. They are well known for having their good built-in pens at an affordable price. Moonman is a company that specifically makes a lot of eyedropper pens. I hesitated a little bit to put Jinhao on here, and the reason is because Jinhao is a little bit lax on their intellectual property rules, I guess. That being said, they do have a couple of newer pens, couple of their own intellectual property, so I did have them there. And you can't beat the price on Chinese pens. So, and then finally we have the Japanese pens. I think Pilot is really the one that dominates the scene. They have a ton of fountain pens, like this one, where's my Prera? Like this one. These are all Pilot pens. They have such a large variation that if there was one pen company that you wanted, that I would suggest you guys to start out with, I would definitely suggest Pilot. Platinum also has a lot of really nice pens. This is a Platinum. This one looks a little bit different because it was built for a specific ink, but they also make really nice fountain pens. The last one on this list is Sailor. Sailor is a company that I personally think focuses a little bit more on the fountain pen ink side instead of the pen side, but they do have a couple of really nice pens, so I do have them listed here. Okay, now we're actually going to talk about some recommendations. So we're going to start at $3 and then go up to $80 pens. The ones on this first page here are meant really mostly to be disposable. So the Pilot Varsity and the V pen, they're actually exactly the same thing, I think, just for like different markets, and they have a different outside shell. But Pilot Varsity and V pen, Platinum Preppy, and the Pilot Petite are all meant to be disposable. So this is the Pilot Petite one. These are super duper cute. If you compare it to maybe a regular size fountain pen, you can kind of see how that size difference is. Comes in a super lot of colors, very petite. But if you take off the cap and put it in the back, which is something we call posting, it actually evolves into more of a full-size pen. You can refill them if you want to with a syringe and eyedroppers and stuff, but they're like $3. I refill mine, but they're meant to be pretty disposable. So the last one that I have on there right now is a Jinhao Shark. They're absolutely cute. Look at that shark. But I don't actually recommend these if you're an absolute newbie. If you are buying a fountain pen for the first time, I don't recommend the Jinhaos. And that's because Jinhao has a little bit of an issue with quality assurance. And so out of the 12 pens that I bought from Jinhao, I had to probably wiggle around with about half of them to get them to actually write. The other thing is that Jinhao's pens come with a converter instead of a cartridge. And so you can put an international cartridge in it, but if you buy any of the other disposable ones, like the Varsity, the Preppy, the Petite one, these all come with ink already in it, or ink cartridge. The Jinhao Shark will not. So you will either have to separately buy your own cartridge or get bottled ink. Okay, let's talk about the next range. There's a lot of pens in this range. This is $10 to $20. Again, I don't have all of the pens on here. These are just pens that I have personally had good experiences or saw good reviews on the internet, but there's definitely other pens in this range that are not on this list. So at $10, I got the Jinhao X750. For $10, this is a steal of a pen. This is like really hefty, really classic style kind of a fountain pen. At $12, you got a Parker Vector. The Pilot Kikuno is actually my starter pen. So these two are the Pilot Kikunos. They've got that cute plastic round kind of a look. I absolutely love them. They are super cute, super fun to write with, and because they're like plastic, I don't feel that bad about kind of like tossing them around because I know they're not going to break. And one of my favorite things about these pens, so the Pilot Kikuno is actually a pen that's meant to like teach children to build a good habit of writing. And so if you actually look closely at the nib, do you guys see that smiley face? It's got a really cute winky face on the nib. So I really like this pen. I just think it's so cute. Okay, the Moonman M2. Again, the Moonman makes eyedropper pens. These all look really pretty. Kawaiko Perkyo honestly reminds me a lot of a Kikuno. They're just a little bit, I guess, thicker, but it's also plastic. The Pilot Metropolitan is really the legendary one on this list here. It's cheap. It ranges from like $16 to $18 depending on where you buy it. It comes in tons and tons of colors. It has that like nice metallic look to it. For that price, to have this kind of a professional looking fountain pen is pretty phenomenal. It's this one on the bottom. Really reliable, like just absolutely great pens. If you know you want a starter pen but you don't want something that looks like it's for children like this one, then definitely try to go with a Pilot Metropolitan. Okay, so around the same range we got Moonman 1's High, which is the one that I already showed in a previous slide. Platinum Plaisir. The TWSBI Go is a pretty new one. It looks kind of funky, but I guess it writes pretty well, so I recommend that as well. Again, definitely look all these up when you buy them. There's like pros and cons to every single one of these pens, so definitely, you know, look at pictures, read reviews, figure out which one's the best for you. Okay, let's go to the next range. So this is $20 to $35. At the top here, at $20 and $23 is Noodler's Conrad and Ahab. Both of these are flex pens. So if you're an artist and you really want that flex, try to go for one of those. I will say I've heard that they're a little bit finicky, so they might not be the best as your very first fountain pens, but I heard they're good. So at $25 we have the Kawaiko Sport. So this is the Kawaiko Sport. It is kind of cute. It's like a little bit shorter than a regular size fountain pen, but you can post it to be a full size. They're super cute, really light, kind of made out of this light plastic. Again, same thing with the Kikunos. I don't feel bad about kind of like throwing this in my bag and running with it. But again, really comfortable to write with, really reliable. One of the things that I do really like about the Kawaiko is that you can replace that nib really easily. So when I first got this, got the Kawaiko, it actually came with a different nib. It's a round nib, and it kind of just fit in here. But I wanted a stub nib, which again is the italic nibs that I mentioned. So I went and bought it, and I put it in. It's nice because if you buy a Kawaiko nib replacement, it comes attached to the feet. So you buy this entire set up here, and so it tends to be a little bit pricey, but you don't ever have to worry about like assembling your pen, I guess, because all you need to do is just screw it in. Lamy Safari is the legendary one in this specific range. It runs at around a little under $30. The Lamy Safari, I actually don't have one, but a lot of people have told me it is like their go-to, super reliable everyday pen. One of the nicest things about, I think, Safari is that they have so many colors and so many collaborations. Like, I think they did a collaboration with like the line characters, like the bear and like the bunny and the duck and stuff. So once we break $30, we got a couple different pens. The Pilot Prera is kind of a small-ish but like real professional looking fountain pen. So if I compare it to a full-size fountain pen like the Jinhao, you can tell it's a little bit smaller, but it's not quite as small as something like a Pilot Petite. But it does have that, you know, kind of businessy kind of a look. I will say that my Pilot Prera runs a little bit dry, which means that the flow of ink is quite low. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If I'm writing on like really thin paper, for example, this will be my go-to pen because it just doesn't output quite as much ink. I don't know if all Pilot Preras are dry. This one was actually given to me by a friend who had really big hands, so maybe he like did something to it. But like even though the ink flow is pretty thin, $50. I just have a couple of recommendations on this list. So the first one at the top, I think this one's around $45, 40 to 50 depending on where you buy it, is the Diplomat Traveler. At $50, we got the Twisby Diamond. This is the Kaweko Lilliput. It looks like this metal cylinder, which is really cool. And at a little above $60, like probably around $65, we got the Twisby Vac 700. That one has a really cool vacuum mechanism full of ink, just like creates vacuum, and at one point it like pops, and all of the ink like comes up. So that's kind of cool. And the most expensive I have on this list is a Lamy Studio. This is basically kind of some of the recommendations I have for more expensive things, I guess. Definitely do your research before you find a pen that's good for you. Okay, I do want to talk really quickly about metallic upgrades. So a lot of companies will have like a plastic pen and then sell a version where it's the exact same pen, but instead of the casing being plastic, they'll sell it in like metal. So again, this is the Kaweko Sport. Usually it's about $25, but you can get one in steel, brass, or aluminum, ranging from $70 to $80. If you like how this writes, if you like how this looks, but you don't like the plastic, you can get it for more expensive. The second picture I have here is the Lamy Safari. You can get it in an aluminum casing. For whatever reason, Lamy actually labels this as the Lamy All-Star. It's the exact same pen, it just has a different casing. The last one on the bottom I have here is the Kaweko Lilliput in their regular black one. And on the right, you can get it in these like really cool like copper and like silver casings. Anyway, I think that's it for pen recommendations. Are there any questions before I move on to